Tyler and Marissa Beckett had been married for exactly 2 days when they pulled into the gravel drive of the Whispering Pines Cabin Resort, tucked into a quiet, forested stretch of the Great Smoky Mountains. It was July 5th, 2013. The air was thick with the hum of cicadas and leftover smoke from 4th of July fireworks still drifting in patches across small mountain towns. The Becketts had just come from a simple church wedding in Ashland, Ohio. Tyler in a gray suit, Marissa in lace and barefoot, grinning under a cascade off sunflowers. They'd skipped the big reception and instead started driving south that night, arriving in Tennessee around noon the next day, with only a small duffel bag, a Polaroid camera, and a bottle of cheap champagne. The owner of the resort, a retired park ranger named Glenn Hartley, remembered them well. They'd checked in around 12:30 p.m., he said, and they were giddy. That was the word he used, not just happy, giddy. Tyler, 28, worked in logistics, quiet, polite, the kind of guy who carried people's bags without being asked. Marissa, 26, had been a preschool teacher, blonde, warm, laughing in every picture. They held hands when they walked, talked over each other, barely looked at their phones. Hartley gave them the keys to cabin number 6 and told them to watch out for black bears near the firewood bins. The cabin was isolated, nestled deeper into the woods than the others, sitting slightly downhill behind a curtain of pine. It had no Wi-Fi, no cell reception, just a radio for emergencies, a stone fireplace, and a deck that faced miles of trees. It was the kind of place you'd go to get off the grid. And according to everyone who saw them that afternoon, that's exactly what they were doing. A young couple, staying in cabin number 4, about 100 yards uphill, remembered seeing them later that day. Around 4 p.m., Tyler and Marissa were carrying wood from a pile behind the lodge, laughing about something. She wore a white sundress. He had a camera slung around his neck. That night, the couple made dinner in the kitchenette, some kind of pasta, according to the unwashed pot later found in the sink, and sat on the deck watching stars until close to midnight. That was the last confirmed time anyone saw Tyler Beckett alive. By 8:10 the next morning, Marissa was on the phone with 911, barely able to speak. When deputies arrived at the scene, she was sitting on the edge of the bed, barefoot, still in her pajamas, crying so hard she was dry heaving. She told the officers she had gone to bed with Tyler around 12:30 a.m. and woke up a little before 7. At first, she thought he was in the bathroom, but when she called out his name and got no answer, she checked the cabin. The bathroom was empty. His shoes were still by the bed. So were his wallet, his keys, and his phone. The door wasn't locked. She walked out to the deck and called for him, expecting him to be nearby, maybe watching the sunrise, maybe taking photos. But the woods were silent. She said her stomach dropped in a way she'd never felt before. Inside, investigators found no signs of a break-in, no damage, no blood, nothing out of place. The door had been closed but not locked, and there were no prints, muddy or otherwise, leading away from the cabin, no signs of a struggle, no indication of panic or movement. His things were all there, his clothes, his bag. Even his wedding ring had been left on the bathroom counter next to a damp towel. The couple's car, a silver Subaru Forester, was still parked out front, untouched. The keys sat next to his wallet, exactly where he'd left them. It didn't make sense. There had been no arguments, no strange behavior, no drug use, no alcohol beyond 2 glasses of champagne, no signs that he'd left voluntarily or been taken by force. There was no one else registered on the resort property that night, aside from the couple in cabin number 4 and an elderly woman in cabin number 2. None of them reported hearing anything unusual, no footsteps, no voices, no screams, just wind in the trees and the usual hum of night. The resort had no surveillance system, no trail cams. The closest gas station was 6 miles down a winding road, and no one matching Tyler's description had been seen there. Marissa's phone records, financials, and social media were clean. Tyler's too. No suspicious calls, no debts, no secret accounts. It was like he had simply gotten up, walked out into the woods, and disappeared without a sound. News off the vanishing spread quickly, first in local headlines, then nationally. "Groom vanishes on honeymoon," one headline read. No trace of newlywed in Smoky Mountains mystery. For a few days, the story dominated regional news. Reporters swarmed the area. Rumors took hold. Some speculated he'd faked his disappearance. Others said he'd wandered off into the woods in a sleepwalking state. Some claimed a bear attack, though no evidence supported that theory. But the cabin told no story. No fingerprints other than the couple's. No signs of wildlife disturbance, no torn clothing, no tracks, nothing. Just silence. And the faint, uneasy sense that whatever had happened to Tyler Beckett had happened quickly, and without warning. Marissa remained at the cabin for 3 days, refusing to leave until search crews made her. Her eyes stayed red. Her hands shook. She kept asking deputies if maybe he'd hit his head, if maybe he was just lost. When she finally left, she took nothing with her except her wedding dress and a framed Polaroid from the night before the wedding. No one realized it yet, but this would become one of the most confounding missing persons cases in the history of Eastern Tennessee. And it had only just begun. The 911 call came in at 8:13 a.m., July 6, 2013. The voice on the other end was breathless, shaking, barely coherent. The dispatcher had to ask her to repeat herself twice. "My husband is missing," she finally said. "He was here when I fell asleep. I woke up and he's just gone." Marissa Beckett sounded dazed. She kept apologizing, over and over, as if she'd done something wrong. She gave the address of the resort, saying they had only just arrived the day before. She said she was afraid to go outside. When the dispatcher asked if there had been a fight, she said no. When asked if he could have gone for a walk, she said, "He didn't take his shoes." The first responding officer arrived 17 minutes later. He knocked once before stepping inside. Marissa was seated on the floor near the bed, her legs pulled into her chest. Her eyes were swollen and bloodshot. She had one of Tyler's T-shirts balled up in her hands, holding it against her face like a shield. Her voice was low, flat, as if something in her had already shut down. She told police the night before had been normal. They'd made dinner, watched the stars, and shared a bottle of wine. They'd talked about starting a family. She said they both went to bed sometime around 12:30. There was no fight, no tension. They fell asleep holding hands. When she woke up, she said, the first thing she noticed was the quiet. The cabin was too still. The other side of the bed was cold. The bathroom door was open, the light off. She said she waited 5 minutes before getting up and looking around. She opened the front door and saw nothing but trees. His sandals were still beside the welcome mat. His wallet was on the nightstand. So were his phone and his keys. The cabin was spotless, not a single sign of forced entry, no furniture out of place, no broken glass, no muddy footprints. The bedsheets were undisturbed. The deadbolt hadn't been turned, but the door had been pulled shut. Officers noted the door made a loud creaking sound when opened, something that should have woken her. She said she hadn't heard a thing. Marissa told police Tyler would never just walk off. He hated hiking. He wasn't adventurous. He was practical to the point of being boring. She laughed a little when she said it, a short, bitter sound that didn't match her face. She said he wouldn't leave her alone, especially not in the woods, especially not without his phone. The officers started checking the surrounding area immediately. 2 deputies fanned out behind the cabin while another stayed to ask more questions. They called in a canine unit and requested aerial support for a grid search. Meanwhile, detectives from the Sevier County Sheriff's Office were dispatched from Pigeon Forge to begin a formal investigation. Inside, the cabin offered no clues, no prints other than the couple's, no DNA that didn't belong. The fireplace was unused. The food in the fridge was untouched. The only things out of place were a wine glass in the sink and a damp towel in the bathroom. Tyler's phone showed no outgoing calls or messages after 10:41 p.m. His last text was to his brother, telling him the cabin was super quiet in a good way. Detectives questioned Marissa again that afternoon. This time, their tone changed slightly, more methodical. Had Tyler been acting strangely before the trip? Any signs he might have been depressed? Had he mentioned wanting to get away from anything? She said no. Not. She said he was excited about the trip, about the future. She said they'd just gotten married. Why would he leave? By that evening, investigators had quietly begun compiling a list of alternate explanations. Walk-off, mental breakdown, voluntary disappearance, domestic altercation, stranger abduction. Each one came with its own set of problems. If Tyler had walked off voluntarily, why take nothing with him? No wallet, no ID, no shoes. If there'd been an argument, why hadn't anyone heard anything? The neighboring cabins were close enough to hear voices through open windows. If he'd been taken, how had someone gotten in and out without leaving a single trace? Marissa was questioned a third time that night at the sheriff's office. She was cooperative but quiet, shaken. Detectives noted her emotional state as distressed but not inconsistent. They asked her to walk them through the entire evening again, minute by minute. She did. Every detail matched what she'd said before. The timeline lined up. Her phone data confirmed it. Still, the suspicion lingered, not as an accusation, but as a possibility. Statistically, when a spouse goes missing, the partner is scrutinized first. It's procedural, investigative protocol. But in this case, they had nothing. No motive, no evidence, no signs of violence. And no, Tyler. That night, Marissa was escorted to a nearby motel under police supervision. She asked if she could stay at the cabin just in case he came back. They told her no. It wasn't safe. When she left, she clutched his t-shirt to her chest like it was the last thing anchoring her to the world. By sunrise, a formal search was underway. Dozens of volunteers, dogs, and helicopters. Everyone was hoping for some sign of him, footprints, a piece of clothing, anything. The area around cabin number 6 was dense but navigable. Search teams marked the terrain, sweeping every ridge and hollow. Nothing, not even broken brush. Inside the cabin, the cicadas buzzed through the open windows like nothing had changed. And somewhere in that silence, the question began to settle in, the one that would follow this case for years. How does a man vanish into thin air without taking so much as his shoes? By the morning of July 7th, just 24 hours after Tyler Beckett had been reported missing, the wooded area surrounding cabin number 6 had become a full-scale search grid. Dozens of trained volunteers arrived alongside deputies, local firefighters, and a state-led search and rescue team. Helicopters circled overhead with infrared cameras. Cadaver dogs were brought in from Knoxville. The perimeter extended outward in all directions. First, 300 yards, then half a mile, then 2 miles. Nothing. The search coordinator, Captain Raymond Harris of Sevier County Search and Rescue, gave a quiet interview 2 days later. He didn't offer theories, just facts. They'd found no torn clothing, no dropped items, no trail, not even a direction of travel. He described it as one of the strangest disappearances he'd ever worked. And he'd been doing this for 19 years. Tyler's scent was present inside the cabin, on the bed, on his towel, even faintly on the porch. But just beyond the edge of the deck, it vanished. The dogs gave up less than 20 feet from the door. No leads, no signals, like chasing a shadow. The terrain wasn't considered particularly dangerous, steep in places but not inaccessible. The woods behind the cabin were relatively open for the region. Sparse underbrush, tall pines, decent visibility. It wasn't a place someone would vanish unless they wanted to. But that didn't explain why he'd gone without shoes, or why he'd left behind everything he owned. The first real clue, if it could even be called that, came on day 3. About 300 yards south of the cabin, in a shallow runoff ditch near a thicket of brush, one of the volunteers spotted something in the mud. A single boot print. Large, deep, well-defined, it pointed downhill away from the cabin. The track was measured, photographed, and cast. At first, responders thought it could have been Tyler's, but it didn't match his shoe size. It was nearly a size and a half too big, and it was the only print found in the entire area. No matching impressions, no other treads, just one isolated footprint in the mud. Investigators marked the location and kept searching, widening the grid around the ditch. The dogs were brought in again. Still nothing. Tyler's cell phone, when examined more closely, offered no additional clues. No outgoing calls or texts past 10:41 p.m. the night before, no drafts, no voicemails. The GPS data showed the phone never left the cabin. His last data ping had been from the resort's internal Wi-Fi system, which only barely reached cabin number 6. By day 5, investigators had canvassed every trailhead, service road, and ranger path within a 5-mile radius. They checked riverbeds, overhangs, bear dens, even vertical shafts formed by natural erosion. They found deer tracks, raccoon prints, discarded beer cans from past hikers, but no trace of Tyler. No clothing fibers, no blood, no human biological markers. It was as if he had never walked into the woods at all. Marissa was questioned again, this time under more formal conditions. She was asked about his physical and mental health. Had he ever experienced disorientation, blackouts, or sleepwalking? She said no. He was stable, predictable. He wasn't the kind of man who made sudden choices. He liked plans. He hated camping. Detectives also began looking into the resort staff. No one had seen or heard anything unusual that night. No vehicles coming or going. No maintenance work scheduled. No guests unaccounted for. The cabins were rustic, but clean. Staff rotations were logged. Security was minimal, but it wasn't a high crime area. Whispering Pines was a place people came to disappear from their phones, not from their lives. Marissa remained in Tennessee during the search, staying at a nearby inn. She made flyers, met with the sheriff daily, sat in on briefings when allowed. Some of the volunteers said she barely spoke. Others said she broke down crying any time someone mentioned the word missing. On the 6th day, the active search was officially scaled back, not because anyone had given up, but because there was simply nothing left to follow. The working theory, if you could call it that, was that Tyler had either wandered off and succumbed to exposure or injury, or he had left intentionally and disguised his exit so well that it left no trace. Neither option made sense. He hadn't withdrawn money. He hadn't booked another lodging. There were no highway sightings, no security footage of him at any rest stop or diner in the Tri-County area. His bank accounts were untouched. His passport was still at home in Ohio. No rideshare requests, no bus or train tickets, nothing. The footprint in the ditch was logged but quietly filed under unconfirmed relevance. There were no follow-up prints, no indication that whoever left it had approached or left the cabin. Forensics couldn't determine how old it was. It could have been a hiker from weeks earlier, or it could have been from the night Tyler vanished. The local media picked up the story and ran with it. Vanished Groom baffles search teams. Honeymoon horror in the Smokies. The national outlets followed, and with them, online speculation. Message boards are filled with amateur theories. Some believed Tyler had been abducted. Others thought he'd staged his disappearance. A few pointed fingers at Marissa, but there was no evidence for any of it. What frustrated investigators most wasn't a lack of effort, it was a lack of pattern. In most cases, even the ones with tragic outcomes, there's a trail, some clue, a sequence of behavior. But Tyler Beckett had walked into a cabin in the woods and simply stopped existing. On the 7th day, Captain Harris gave a final press statement before transferring the case back to the sheriff's department. He said his teams had done everything they could, that there were no leads left to follow. And then he added one sentence, something he hadn't meant to say out loud. It's like he evaporated. What he didn't say, but what many in law enforcement were quietly thinking, was this. Cases like this don't usually end in resolution. They sit. They wait. And sometimes, long after hope is gone, something small and strange bubbles back up. But in July of 2013, that moment still hadn't come, and nobody was ready for what would happen next. Marissa Beckett returned to Ohio 10 days after Tyler vanished. She came back alone, exhausted, and largely silent. Her parents picked her up from the airport in Columbus. She had no luggage, only a plastic evidence bag given to her by the sheriff's office containing Tyler's wallet, phone, and wedding band. She didn't cry when she hugged her mother. She just stood there, holding onto her like she was trying to stop herself from slipping through. For the first few weeks, she barely left her childhood bedroom. She slept in short bursts, refused to talk to the media, and declined every request for interviews. Reporters camped outside the house. Her father asked them to leave twice. Eventually, they did. But the questions didn't stop. They just moved online. People wanted answers. And in the absence of new information, they began creating their own. Anonymous threads on Reddit and web forums started picking apart the timeline, the location, her background, Tyler's job, and their finances. One post claimed Tyler had been $15,000 in credit card debt. Another accused Marissa of inconsistencies in her 911 call. None of it was verified, but it didn't matter. In missing persons cases, especially ones with no suspects and no resolution, the narrative vacuum fills fast, and Marissa's silence became part of the story. Her parents said she stopped talking about Tyler almost entirely. She refused to look at photos. She didn't watch the news. She'd wake up in the middle of the night and walk barefoot down the street just to make sure the world was still there. Once, her father found her asleep in Tyler's car, keys still in the ignition. She'd been sitting in the driveway for almost 5 hours. 3 weeks after returning, she resigned from her teaching position at the preschool. Her letter was 1 sentence long. She said she wasn't ready to be around children. No one questioned it. Her co-workers described her as kind but distant, fragile, like she was only half present, watching life from behind a window. She started therapy in early September. Weekly sessions, sometimes twice. But progress was uneven. She refused to entertain theories. She didn't want to talk about what could have happened or what might still happen. She wouldn't say Tyler was dead, but she also wouldn't say she thought he was alive. The counselor described it as frozen grief, a state where no emotional process can begin because there's no defined loss, no proof, no closure. That fall, she put the house up for sale. The one they'd been living in since 2011, the one they'd been planning to remodel together. Tyler had already drawn up blueprints for expanding the kitchen. She never unpacked the last of the wedding gifts. Most of the boxes still sat stacked in the hallway, unopened. By December, the house was sold. She moved into a 1-bedroom apartment on the edge of town under a different name on the lease. The address was unlisted. Her phone number changed. She deleted her social media accounts entirely. It was as if she'd gone into hiding, but not from anyone in particular, just from the world itself. Online speculation only grew. The most aggressive theory, that Marissa had staged the disappearance, started to gain traction when an anonymous user posted a supposed timeline discrepancy from her police interviews. The claim was that she'd changed the time she said they'd gone to bed by 30 minutes between statements. The post went viral. But police reviewed the tapes and found no inconsistency. The timestamps were the same in each version. The 30-minute gap had been due to officers referencing different time zones between dispatch and the initial statement, a paperwork error. But no one reposted the correction. By the spring of 2014, the forums had splintered. One group believed Tyler had run off to start a new life. Another insisted it was an abduction. A smaller, louder group remained focused on Marissa. They dissected every blurry photo, every rumor, every detail from their wedding registry. Someone claimed she had been dating someone new just months later. That wasn't true. She didn't go on a single date for more than a year. Her closest friend from college, Elise Danner, said in an interview later that something in Marissa never came back after the honeymoon. She stopped wearing bright colors. She stopped making eye contact. Her voice got quieter. Elise said it was like the entire world had become too loud for her. Any unexpected noise made her flinch. She started keeping all the blinds closed. She no longer talked about the future, and she never said Tyler's name out loud again. The police, for their part, continued to investigate quietly through the fall. But with no physical evidence, no signs of foul play, and no body, the case grew colder by the month. In February 2014, a new detective was assigned. He reviewed the case from scratch, interviewing Marissa again in a formal setting. She told him the same thing she'd told the first officers. She hadn't seen anything. She hadn't heard anything. She just went to sleep, and when she woke up, Tyler was gone. When asked if she thought he could have staged it, she shook her head once, firmly. She said, "If he had a secret, he didn't even know it yet." It was one of the few new things she'd said in months, and no one knew what she meant by it. She stayed off the radar after that. No press appearances, no statements. She was still legally married, but she didn't attend any of the anniversary vigils. People said she was cold. Some said she was hiding something. But her therapist later told a journalist off the record, she wasn't hiding. She was surviving. The grief that doesn't know where to go, that's the one that eats people alive. And beneath all of it, the question still sat there, unanswered. Not just what happened to Tyler Beckett, but who was he when no one was watching? 9 months after, Tyler Beckett vanished, long after the headlines had quieted and the official investigation had gone dormant. A single photo brought the case back into focus, if only for a moment. It surfaced on a personal blog run by one of Marissa's former bridesmaids. The post was meant to be a tribute to their wedding, a bittersweet memory of a day that now carried too much weight. The image was simple. Tyler and Marissa are standing at the altar, sunlight spilling through the trees. She's holding his hands. He's smiling like he has no idea what's coming. But in the far background, partially obscured by branches, someone is watching. It was barely noticeable at first, just a shape in the tree line, slightly to the left of the officiant. A man, standing still. Not part of the guests, not standing with the chairs, not walking or moving, just watching. Tyler's younger brother Ryan was the first to comment on it publicly. He reposted the image with a caption that simply read, "This guy was not one of us." He was sure of it. He'd looked through every wedding photo they had, from the ceremony to the reception, and this man never appeared again. No one knew who he was. No one remembered seeing him. At first, people dismissed it as a hiker or a staff member from the event space, but the venue confirmed there had been no workers stationed in that part of the property, and the trail behind the ceremony site was closed that weekend due to storm damage. A groundskeeper checked the logs. No one was assigned to patrol or clean the wooded area behind the altar. Whoever it was had no reason to be there. Detectives were notified, and the photo was added to the Beckett file. A digital forensic specialist analyzed the image, running it through sharpening filters, contrast enhancements, and facial mapping software. But the figure remained indistinct. Male, medium build, average height, wearing a dark jacket, possibly a baseball cap. The angle was wrong, the lighting too uneven. Facial recognition yielded no hits. He was too far back, too partially hidden. Still, the presence felt deliberate. He was facing the ceremony, centered in the frame as if he had been watching them the entire time. And in a strange way, that made everything feel different. Because up until that point, Tyler's disappearance had been treated as something internal, a moment of confusion, a breakdown, a personal choice, a tragic accident. But now, with this figure in the trees, there was a new possibility on the table, one that nobody had wanted to say out loud. What if Tyler hadn't just vanished? What if someone had been watching him long before that cabin? The detective assigned to review the new lead was cautious but intrigued. He tracked down every guest from the wedding, cross-referenced the photos with attendance records, and even pulled surveillance footage from the parking lot of the venue. Nothing stood out. No unfamiliar vehicles, no uninvited guests. No one could remember seeing a man standing in the woods. He wasn't in any of the group shots. He hadn't come through the front entrance. He just appeared in that one frame. Marissa was shown the photo, but she didn't say much. She stared at it for a long time, her eyes locked on the figure in the background, then handed it back without comment. When asked if she'd noticed anything strange that day, anything off, any weird feelings, she shook her head once, then left the room. Her therapist later told investigators it had unsettled her more than anything else in the case so far. Not because she recognized the man, but because she didn't. The online community reignited almost immediately. Theories multiplied. Some believed it was a stalker. Others said it had to be someone from Tyler's past. A few accused the bridesmaid of staging the entire thing for attention, but the photo held up under scrutiny. It hadn't been edited. The metadata matched. The file had been stored on a camera card that hadn't been touched in over a year. Investigators tried to trace every wedding vendor, photographer assistant, and volunteer staff member who had been on site that day. All were accounted for. No matches, nothing close. The man in the trees didn't fit anyone's description. And eventually, the lead, like every other one in the case, ran cold. But for Tyler's family, it was the first time they felt like someone else might have been involved, not just in the disappearance, but in the lead-up. Ryan became obsessed with the idea. He printed out the photo, posted it on his wall, circled the man in red, and began making lists. Who could have been watching them? Why? Had Tyler mentioned anything before the wedding? A bad deal? A grudge? Ryan dug through his brother's email archives, his browser history, even his old text logs. There was nothing unusual, no threats, no hints of trouble, just wedding plans, work updates, and the occasional meme exchange. Eventually, the photo faded from headlines. Without a clear face, a name, or any supporting evidence, it became just another curiosity. A detail that raised questions, but answered none. The kind of detail that makes you pause, but doesn't take you anywhere. Still, for the people closest to Tyler, it changed something. It introduced the idea that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't random. That maybe someone had been watching him before the cabin, before the honeymoon, before any of it. And if that was true, then the story they thought they understood, the one about a man vanishing into the woods, might have started long before the wedding ever did. By 2016, Tyler Beckett's case had been sitting cold for nearly 5 years. The media attention had faded, the search efforts had long ended, and even the online forums, once relentless with speculation, had grown quieter. But inside the evidence room of the Hocking County Sheriff's Department, a single piece of tech was about to pull the case violently. Back into motion. Tyler's phone, recovered from the cabin the night he vanished, had been cataloged, imaged, and locked away. At the time, nothing on it had stood out. No suspicious messages, no signs of distress, no GPS anomalies. But back then, data extraction tools weren't what they are now. A new digital forensics contractor, working through a backlog of cases, was assigned to revisit a dozen devices from old missing persons files. It was procedural, just a box to check. But when she plugged Tyler's phone into the updated forensic system, the scan surfaced a file that had gone undetected in the original review. A voice memo, never saved to his contacts, never attached to a message, just sitting in the device's local cache. Its timestamp, 11:42 p.m. The night before, Marissa woke up alone. It was an unsent voicemail, addressed to Matt, Tyler's best friend since college. The tone was low, hushed, and uneasy. He sounded alert but not panicked. Not yet. The audio began mid-thought, like he'd started talking before pressing record. "I don't know, man. It's probably nothing, but I think someone's outside. I keep hearing something near the back of the cabin. Thought it was the wind at first, but it's not windy. Anyway, I'm going to check it out in a second. Just figured I'd call in case..." And then silence. He never pressed send. The recording stopped abruptly. Mid-sentence, mid-thought, just ended. The discovery was passed up the chain immediately. It was the first new lead in years. Detectives who had long stopped checking the case file were suddenly back in conference rooms, reviewing audio, cross-referencing timestamps, trying to understand what it meant. Why hadn't it been found before? Had the original forensics team missed it, or had the file been corrupted, buried too deep in the system to be detected with 2011 software? More importantly, why didn't Tyler finish the message? Why didn't he send it? Marissa was called in to listen. She hadn't heard his voice in years. The sound of it reportedly left her speechless. The tone in Tyler's voice, measured, calm, but disturbed, shattered her. It brought her back to that night, the moment she woke up alone. The door was slightly ajar. His wallet and phone were still on the nightstand. The cicadas. She told investigators she hadn't heard anything during the night. No movement, no footsteps. She hadn't even remembered Tyler getting up. The timestamp raised new questions. If the voicemail was recorded at 11:42 p.m., that meant Tyler was still alive, still thinking clearly, and still inside the cabin well after the couple had gone to bed. Marissa had told investigators they turned in around 10:30. She remembered that detail clearly. They had been exhausted from hiking earlier that day and planned to sleep early. So had Tyler gotten back up without waking her? Had something drawn him out? The sheriff's office made an internal admission. Shortly afterward, the voicemail had indeed been missed in the original 2011 review. At the time, the department only had limited digital forensics capability. They had accessed recent texts and call logs, but the deeper memory sectors had gone unexamined. It was a critical oversight, one that might have changed the urgency and direction of the initial investigation. Speculation erupted online almost immediately. People dissected the voicemail down to the second. Was there something in the background? A crunch of leaves? A second voice? Analysts ran it through multiple audio filters. Some claimed they could hear breathing, maybe not Tyler's, but the official statement from the lab was inconclusive. The ambient noise was too faint, the quality too degraded. Matt, the friend the message was intended for, hadn't known about the voicemail until the department contacted him. He broke down after hearing it. He said he'd been texting with Tyler just 2 days before the honeymoon, talking about life, the wedding, the usual. Tyler hadn't mentioned anything strange. Nothing about being followed, nothing about anxiety. Matt was convinced the voicemail meant Tyler had seen something or someone outside the cabin. Search efforts had covered the perimeter extensively back in 2011, but in light of the voicemail, one of the detectives returned to the original reports. They found something they hadn't connected before. A park ranger's note about strange noises reported that night by another camper 3 miles northeast of the Beckett cabin. The camper had mentioned hearing what sounded like a scream just before midnight, followed by silence. The ranger had written it off. There had been no matching incidents that night, no reports of missing persons, nothing to justify escalation. But now, with this voicemail, the timeline lined up uncomfortably. For the first time, law enforcement publicly acknowledged the possibility that Tyler Beckett had not left the cabin voluntarily, that he may have seen someone watching, someone outside. But that was as far as they could go. The voicemail was chilling, it was real, and it proved one thing with absolute certainty. Tyler had sensed something was wrong. He had reached out. He'd started a message meant to say, just in case. But whatever happened between pressing record and pressing send stopped him. And that gap, those missing seconds, became the space where every new question now lived. It started with an anonymous email, just a few lines, unsigned, sent to a local reporter who had written a short 10-year retrospective on the Tyler Beckett disappearance. The reporter, a freelance crime writer named Olivia Grant, initially thought it was a prank, until she followed up. The message claimed that cabin number 6, where Tyler and Marissa had stayed on their honeymoon, had a history. 2 other men had gone missing from that same cabin in the past. Once in 1994. Again in 1978. Both within a day of arrival. Both were never found. Grant reached out to the sheriff's department first. They had no record of these incidents under the Beckett case file. Nothing had come up in their background checks on the cabin or the park. But when she pulled archived public safety logs from the Department of Natural Resources, the trail started to unfold. In September 1994, a 32-year-old man named David Clemens had vanished while staying in cabin number 6 with his girlfriend. They were from Michigan. According to the report, David had gone out for a short walk to photograph the morning fog and never returned. His girlfriend had waited over an hour before reporting him missing. Search and rescue dogs found nothing. Helicopters were grounded that day due to low visibility. After 5 days, the case was closed due to a lack of evidence. There had been no media attention. No foul play was ever confirmed. In the 1978 case, the report was even thinner. A 40-year-old insurance adjuster named Paul Lacey had been on a weekend getaway with his wife. They'd checked into cabin number 6 on a Friday. That night, he reportedly stepped outside to smoke a cigarette before bed. She fell asleep waiting for him. By morning, he was gone. No struggle, no note. Just the front door, left slightly open. The search logs showed multiple sweeps of the nearby woods, even dragging the lake. Nothing was ever recovered. Both cases predated modern digital systems, which explained why they hadn't triggered flags during the original Beckett investigation. But now, stacked next to Tyler's disappearance, a disturbing pattern began to take shape. 3 men, all in cabin number 6, all disappearing within the first 24 hours, all under vague and silent circumstances. None ever seen again. When Grant pushed further, she learned that the anonymous tip had come from a retired ranger who had worked the region for decades. He refused to give his name publicly, but agreed to speak on background under the condition that his identity remained sealed. According to him, there had always been quiet rumors about that section of the park. Rangers called it the Hollow. He didn't believe in anything supernatural, but he swore something about the terrain felt off, something disorienting. People reported getting turned around even on marked trails. Radios would cut out randomly. It was the only sector of the park where multiple missing persons cases had occurred without resolution. When asked why none of this had ever been disclosed to the public, he claimed it wasn't policy to warn guests unless there was a direct proven risk. Besides, the incidents were decades apart. To most, it was just an unfortunate coincidence. But the old ranger disagreed. He said he kept a private list. There were more names on it than the public ever knew. Grant published her findings online in a long-form investigative piece that went viral within a week. Reddit threads dissected every detail. Locals in Hocking Hills started to question the park's history. Former rangers were contacted. Some dismissed the claims. Others remained eerily silent. But a few confirmed it. Yes, cabin number 6 had a strange air about it. Guests had complained of nausea, of trouble sleeping, of hearing strange sounds at night, though nothing ever came of it officially. The owners of the cabin rental company were eventually contacted for comment. They denied any knowledge of prior incidents. When asked why cabin number 6 was still available for booking, they responded that no official reports had ever linked it to criminal activity or confirmed danger. Within days, their website went offline. Bookings were suspended. The business rebranded under a different name shortly after. Law enforcement, under pressure from renewed media attention, reopened the Beckett case for formal review. Detectives began comparing notes from the older disappearances, though much of the physical evidence had long since been lost or destroyed. Still, patterns emerged. Each man had been healthy, between 30 and 40 years old, and each vanished while their partner slept or was momentarily distracted. No signs of forced entry, no sounds of struggle. In all 3 cases, the doors were found ajar. Theories bloomed. Some claimed it was a serial offender operating over decades, someone who watched for couples arriving and targeted men specifically. Others argued it was geographical, that the land itself was disorienting, magnetic, or naturally hazardous. Some pushed supernatural ideas, but those were quickly drowned out by voices demanding physical explanations. Redditors combed topographical maps marking out anomalies. One user claimed the GPS coordinates for cabin number 6 lay directly on an old Native American boundary line known for burial rites, but no historian ever confirmed it. Another posted that the area surrounding the cabin contained multiple limestone fissures, natural crevasses where a body could disappear without a trace. But even as the theories mounted, no physical proof ever emerged, no remains, no evidence of foul play, no answers. Just a growing sense that Tyler Beckett's case wasn't unique and maybe never had been. What haunted people most wasn't just that others had disappeared from cabin number 6. It was how similar the circumstances were, how clean, how silent, how fast. 3 different decades, 3 men, 3 partners left behind with nothing but confusion and half-filled overnight bags. No screams, no footprints, no calls for help, just a pattern hiding in plain sight for over 40 years. And now, with Tyler's case back in the national spotlight, the question became impossible to ignore. If this wasn't a coincidence, if something was happening at cabin number 6, then why had it taken so long for anyone to notice? And how many others had simply gone missing without anyone connecting the dots? It was almost midnight when she saw him. The diner had been nearly empty, save for a couple of truckers in the back, Booth and an older man nursing coffee at the counter. The woman, Karen Dalton, had worked the night shift at Ray's Diner on Route 56 for over 20 years. She'd seen her share of drunk sleepwalkers and lost hikers, but something about the man who came through the door that night in 2014 had stayed with her, long after she'd cleaned the coffee pots and flipped the chairs onto the tables. She didn't recognize the face at the time, but 7 years later, when she saw Tyler Beckett's photo in an anniversary article about his disappearance, her hands stopped moving. That was him. She remembered the way he looked, barefoot, hair messy, eyes unfocused. He wasn't bleeding or injured, but he seemed off, dazed, like someone waking up mid-dream. He came in through the side entrance, didn't sit down, and didn't order anything. Just stood by the register, mumbling. She asked if he needed help. He didn't seem to hear. He kept repeating something under his breath, something like, "Wrong road, not this way. I didn't mean to." At the time, she assumed he was high. Meth wasn't uncommon in rural parts of Ohio, and plenty of addicts drifted through the area. But he didn't have that look. No twitching, no erratic movement, just confused, almost scared. She offered to call someone, maybe get him a ride. He just shook his head and walked back out into the dark, barefoot on gravel. She remembered watching him disappear past the edge of the diner lights, shirt damp from the humidity, not even glancing back. That was the last she saw of him. The memory might have stayed buried if not for the article. She'd never connected the dots. Cabin number 6, the park, the missing honeymooner. She only realized later that Ray's Diner was barely 4 miles from where Tyler and Marissa had been staying. It would have taken him an hour, maybe more, to walk that distance barefoot in the dark, assuming he even knew where he was going. When she came forward in 2021, it sparked immediate interest from the investigative team, still informally looking into Tyler's case. But the first question was obvious. Why wait 7 years? Karen said she didn't know. It hadn't seemed important at the time. He wasn't hurt. He hadn't asked for help. It wasn't until she saw his face again, staring back from the newspaper, that it clicked. And by then, she felt sick, realizing what she'd missed. Detectives confirmed there had once been surveillance cameras inside the diner, but the tapes rotated every 72 hours. That footage was long gone. No credit card use, no record of phone calls. Nothing physical ties Tyler to that spot. Just a memory from a tired woman on a quiet shift, 7 years too late. Still, her details were oddly specific. She recalled what he wore, a light gray t-shirt, dark sweatpants, no shoes. She remembered how he kept rubbing one hand with the other, over and over, like something had burned him. She even remembered what he smelled, like dirt and pine and something faintly metallic. Police couldn't confirm any of it, but they didn't dismiss it either. There had never been another credible sighting of Tyler after the night he vanished. Not one. But Karen's account introduced a possibility no one had seriously entertained. What if Tyler had left the cabin? And not under force, but under some kind of mental break or psychological episode. It reopened a theory that had been mentioned early on, then discarded. Temporary fugue state. A rare dissociative condition where a person loses awareness of their identity, often wandering, appearing coherent but confused. It was hard to prove, especially without any psychiatric history, and Marissa had insisted Tyler had never shown signs of mental illness. But it explained the barefoot walk, the disoriented behavior, the way he disappeared without leaving a single trace behind. Fugue states could last hours, sometimes days. Some people came back, others didn't. And in extreme cases, the person never remembered who they were. But even if that were true, if Tyler had experienced a fugue, walked 4 miles barefoot through the woods and down an unlit road, what happened next? Where did he go after Ray's Diner? Why hadn't he been found? And if he was truly confused, why hadn't he accepted help when it was offered? Detectives canvassed the surrounding area again, this time focused on routes from the diner outward. They pulled old utility records, rechecked unidentified body reports from neighboring counties, and even contacted hospitals to see if someone matching Tyler's description had ever been treated without ID. Nothing. The only other development came from a local man who lived half a mile from the diner. When shown Tyler's photo, he admitted it looked familiar. He remembered seeing someone on his property around that same year, disoriented, near his shed. But it had been so brief and so long ago that he couldn't be sure. Besides, he never reported it. The man hadn't stayed long, just stood there for a moment in the yard before walking back into the trees. It wasn't much, but it fit. The theory started to circulate online: fugue, dissociation, maybe even trauma-induced. Reddit threads dissected the timeline, mapping potential routes, estimating how far someone could walk barefoot in the dark. Some speculated Tyler had fallen, hit his head, and wandered into the woods. Others believed something triggered him, something inside cabin number 6 that no one else ever saw. A few held to the idea that someone was following him, pushing him into fear, that the mumbling about the wrong road wasn't metaphorical, it was literal. But the hardest part to explain was the silence. If Tyler Beckett had left that cabin alive and voluntarily, why didn't he reach out to anyone afterward? Why not call his wife, his brother, his parents? Even in a fugue, something should have surfaced: a trace, a sighting, a footprint. Instead, all they had was a waitress's memory, soft-edged by time, sharpened by guilt. And one last image: a barefoot man in the dark, rubbing his hands, whispering to himself about a road he wasn't supposed to be on. And no one knew where it led. It was a remote property, just a 2-room cabin tucked into the hills off County Road 12. The kind of place people drive past without noticing. It hadn't seen much use in years, not since the owner, a retired machinist named Walter Griggs, grew too ill to visit. In early 2025, after Walter's death, his son Dan made the trip out there for the first time in over a decade. He came with a truck, a box of trash bags, and no expectations. He didn't know his father had been keeping secrets. The cabin smelled like mildew and old wood. Mice had gotten into the insulation. Most of what Dan found inside was junk: rusted tools, rotting tarps, expired canned food. He was prying up warped floorboards in the back room when he noticed something odd. One of the boards had been shaved thin underneath, like someone had hollowed it deliberately. Inside the cavity, sealed in a cloudy plastic sandwich bag, was a brown leather wallet. It was dusty but dry. The leather cracked as Dan opened it. The driver's license belonged to Tyler Beckett. Dan had never heard the name, but the ID didn't look fake. It had a photo of a young man, brown hair, square jaw, a cautious half-smile, and a Columbus address. There were a few crumpled dollar bills, no credit cards, and no personal notes. But tucked behind the license was a single folded receipt. The date read, July 9th, 2013. 2 days after Tyler had been reported missing. The receipt was from a gas station 41 miles west of the Honeymoon Hills Lodge. Printed in faded ink was a single line item: bottled water. Cash tendered. Dan didn't know what to make of it. He called the sheriff's department, thinking maybe it had something to do with theft, even his father. The officer who responded took one look at the name and fell silent. The case had been cold for over a decade. There'd been theories, rumors, even sightings. But never this. Never anything that confirmed Tyler Beckett had been alive after July 7th. The plastic bag was sent for forensic testing, but the initial discovery triggered something far more urgent: a new investigation. A detective with the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation was assigned to the scene. Dan was questioned, though it was clear he had no connection to Tyler and no knowledge of how the wallet got there. He barely knew his father. They had spoken maybe twice a year. Walter had been reclusive, keeping to himself after his wife died in 1996. Neighbors described him as quiet but polite, always paid cash. The cabin's location raised more questions. It was nearly 30 miles west of the lodge where Tyler and Marissa had been staying, well beyond the original search radius. No one had thought to look there, and there was no known connection between Walter Griggs and the Becketts. They lived in entirely different parts of the state, different worlds. The plastic bag showed signs of deliberate preservation. The wallet had been sealed well, intentionally, not buried in dirt, not tossed aside, hidden. Someone had meant for it to stay out of sight, yet it wasn't burned or destroyed or tossed in a river. It had been protected. Detectives went to the gas station listed on the receipt. It was still there. Anderson's Fuel and Stop, a roadside station surrounded by farmland. But by now, the surveillance tapes from 2013 were long gone. The clerk working in 2025 had no idea who Tyler Beckett was. There was no record of any purchase under Tyler's name or card because the transaction had been cash. The receipt was real, but it couldn't be traced further. For the first time since 2014, investigators were faced with hard evidence that Tyler had survived, at least temporarily. He hadn't vanished into thin air. He'd been walking, moving, buying water with cash, carrying his ID. But the most disturbing part wasn't the receipt. It was the wallet's location. Someone had to have placed it under that floorboard. Someone knew. They searched the cabin, but found no blood, no fingerprints, no clothing or personal effects belonging to Tyler. There were no hidden notebooks, no camera footage, no typed confessions, just a space and a hollowed board. That left one question no one could answer. How did Tyler Beckett's wallet end up inside a dead man's cabin? Marissa was contacted again. She was remarried now, living in Pennsylvania with a young daughter. She agreed to meet with detectives, but said she'd never heard of Walter Griggs. Neither had Tyler's brother nor parents. No overlapping social circles, no mutual friends. And Tyler had never mentioned anything about a remote cabin in western Ohio. But Marissa did say something that stuck. Tyler had a habit of keeping small objects safe, almost obsessively. He hated losing things. If he had a wallet, he'd never have willingly parted with it, especially not with his ID still inside. Some investigators floated a grim possibility, that Tyler hadn't lost his wallet, that someone else took it, that the receipt wasn't proof he was walking free, but a breadcrumb in a much darker trail. If he had been at that gas station on July 9th, it was unclear what happened after. No sightings, no calls, no credit card use. And if he made it to the cabin, did he go willingly, or was he brought there? Others saw something else, the use of cash, the lack of shoes, the disoriented behavior described by the waitress from Ray's Diner. It all fit a pattern, someone on the move, hiding, not thinking clearly. Maybe Tyler hadn't known where he was going. Maybe he stumbled upon the cabin, and Walter Griggs wasn't even home. Or maybe he was. The working theories spiraled quickly, some plausible, others less so. That Walter had found him and taken him, that Tyler was hurt and hiding. That someone else entirely had been involved, using the cabin as a dumping ground for evidence. But the strongest undercurrent was something quieter. This was no accident. That wallet had been hidden deliberately, not discarded. Someone had wanted it out of sight, but preserved. Like a message, or a secret. Investigators are now quietly seeking anyone who knew Walter Griggs in 2013. Old work buddies, neighbors, hunting partners. No leads have surfaced yet. But one thing is clear, the timeline just shifted. Tyler didn't vanish on July 7th, he lived at least 2 more days. He walked, he paid in cash, he had a destination, and somewhere along the line, he, or someone else, sealed a part of his life inside a wooden floorboard and never told a soul. And if Tyler left that gas station alive, the next question isn't how he got to the cabin. It's where he went after. The wallet changed everything. Then changed nothing. For a brief moment in 2025, the discovery sparked renewed urgency. A receipt dated 2 days after Tyler Beckett disappeared. A wallet sealed in plastic, hidden inside a cabin floorboard. Proof that he'd survived beyond July 7th. But as weeks passed, hope began to shrink back into silence. For all the energy it stirred, the trail again ran cold. Investigators followed every angle they could. They canvassed the area surrounding the cabin, questioned anyone who had crossed paths with the Griggs family, even pulled property records to see if Walter Griggs had ever owned another home, another cabin, anything closer to the original search zone. Nothing surfaced. No physical evidence, no DNA. Just that wallet, dry, preserved, almost too deliberately. A ghost story with a timestamp. Detectives circled back to the original investigation, sifting through records with fresh eyes. The voicemail on Tyler's old phone, unearthed years earlier, now seemed even more critical. The one he never sent. The one that mentioned someone being outside. Combined with the waitress's memory of a barefoot man muttering about the wrong road, it painted a picture that was hard to ignore. Tyler had been disoriented, maybe paranoid, possibly running. But from what, or from whom, no one could say. The working theory leaned toward foul play. But without a body, without a witness, it remained a theory and nothing more. Public interest spiked again, briefly. Local forums buzzed with speculation. Some believed Tyler had suffered a psychological break, wandered off and lost touch with reality. Others insisted there had to be a second party involved. Too many details didn't make sense. Why would he leave his shoes behind? Why was his wedding ring found clean, untouched in the cabin safe, as if never worn? Why would he carry his ID and nothing else? Why go to a gas station nearly 40 miles away, pay in cash, and then vanish again? The theories grew darker. Some whispered about cult activity in the surrounding, forested areas, pointing to old unsolved disappearances. Others focused on Tyler's mental state, suggesting he may have staged his vanishing, though no one could explain why a man with no history of instability would choose to disappear on his honeymoon. The police admitted they couldn't rule anything out. The truth is, they didn't have enough to rule anything in. Marissa, now living under a new name in Pennsylvania, declined all interviews. She had remarried quietly 3 years earlier. But legally, she was still tied to Tyler Beckett. No death certificate had ever been filed. Technically, he was still her husband. She was contacted after the wallet surfaced, and while she cooperated with law enforcement, she made it clear she had no interest in revisiting the past publicly. Those close to her said the experience had fractured something permanent. She no longer spoke of Tyler, didn't keep his photos, didn't answer questions about that night. As far as she was concerned, the door had been closed, just not locked. Back in Columbus, Tyler's parents held on to the kind of hope that softens into ritual. His mother still left the porch light on. His father stopped going to church, but kept a folded photo in his wallet, even after a stroke left him unable to speak. His brother, Drew, spent years obsessively searching online for clues, leads, even dreams, anything that might point to a sliver of truth. After the wallet was found, he drove to the gas station on Route 18 and sat in the parking lot for an hour, trying to imagine Tyler standing there. But the air felt hollow. Too much time had passed. The physical evidence was limited to a few haunting artifacts, the voicemail never sent, the waitress's long-ago memory, the receipt, the wallet, the wedding ring. Each one seemed to pull Tyler in a different direction. Was he frightened, hiding, running? Was he lured, trapped, or manipulated? Was he ever really alone? No one knows why he would take off his wedding ring, let alone leave it behind, clean, unworn, locked in the cabin safe like it had never belonged to him. Marissa didn't even know it had been found until investigators returned it to her years later. She accepted it with a nod, but never put it on. She told detectives she remembered Tyler wearing it that morning. After that, she didn't recall seeing it again. The last confirmed piece of evidence is still that gas station receipt. July 9th, 2013. A bottle of water purchased with cash. A timestamp. The handwriting on the folded receipt matched other samples of Tyler's. But there's no footage, no witness, no follow-up. Whatever happened in that gas station, it's where the story goes quiet again. Like he stepped into some liminal space that doesn't keep records. The investigators assigned to the case now describe it as one of the most frustrating in the department's history, because every clue is just clear enough to spark more questions, but never answers. If he were alive on July 9th, who was he trying to become? If someone else was involved, why leave the wallet preserved, but hidden? If he died, why has his body never been found? What remained in evidence was symbolic, almost cruelly so. A gold wedding band, never worn long enough to dull. A phone filled with ordinary texts and playlists and directions back to Columbus. and a driver's license photo of a man who looked stable, smart, and ready to start his life. Tyler Beckett has now been missing for 12 years. Officially, he is a cold case. Unofficially, he is a question mark. For the families left behind, that distinction doesn't matter. Missing is missing. Grief doesn't need closure to stay alive. And every year, the silence grows heavier. There is no grave, no memorial. Just a paper trail that stops mid-sentence and a ring that still waits in an evidence locker, untouched, still married, still missing.